What's up, everybody? I'm Nick King, Darden Class 2016. I was a BCG intern in Philadelphia last summer.
Jake Levy, class 2016 as well. I was an Accenture intern this summer. And we're going to be doing a case called Scotch Bar. Hopefully the leaf blower in the background goes away, but that will sometimes happen during case interviews. And Nick, you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. So you're sitting in one of Chicago's oldest Scotch bars with a fellow intern. It is a Friday night after a busy week at your summer internship. The weather is mild, a perfect summer evening. While enjoying one of the bar's finest stogies and sipping an 18-year-old Macallan single malt, your friend asks you, how much do you think this bar is worth? Using a back-of-the-envelope calculation, how would you go about determining the value of this bar?
Okay. So, if I'm understanding correctly, the exercise here is to value the enterprise value of this Scotch Bar in Chicago. That's
Yep.
right. Okay, cool. So, is it fair to understand that this bar is selling drinks? They're selling scotch, beer, whatever, some food maybe, and cigars, and that would be their primary, revenue streams.
They actually don't sell food.
Okay.
They don't currently have a kitchen.
Okay.
And they're not selling beer as well.
Okay.
Their revenue is really coming from scotch and cigars.
Okay. Scotch and cigars. Okay, so I think I have enough information to just gather my thoughts for it, and just assuming this is just a normal bar.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, proper. Okay, so I'm thinking about this problem in three buckets. So I'm thinking about the profitability of the bar as it operates today. So obviously we're going to be looking at revenue and costs. And I'm going to also be thinking about what the growth prospects are for the bar, because I'm not just going to value the profitability today, I want to know what it's going to look like moving in the future. And I'm also going to want to understand how risky is this venture, and are there any other factors that are really going to play into the profitability of the bar in the future that we haven't considered today. So from a profitability perspective, I want to look at what are the price points I'm selling for my cigar and my scotch. I would imagine it's a pretty upscale bar, but I'm sure we'll learn about that later. How are we doing in terms of customer traffic? Are we generating enough visits to the store? And then what's our average spend per visit? Actually, this got me thinking that seasonality is probably going to be pretty important to us from a revenue perspective. Do we have peaks and valleys? Do we have, are weekends big for us? That kind of thing.
Why do you say that?
Just because I know restaurant and bar industry people are going to be more likely to go out on Friday and Saturday nights. I don't know if this is like an after work bar, but I would imagine that weekend traffic is going to be more. People are more likely to go out when it's nice out. If it's the weather's nice, I think that Kate's mentioned it's a beautiful day right now in Chicago, but I know the winters are really rough. So do people stay indoors more? From a cost perspective, I think we're going to be looking at just normal fixed costs of operating, rent, utilities, maintaining the bar, furniture, that kind of stuff, insurance, and I put R&D. I don't know if we like have to sample new fancy cigars or new scotch or anything like that, but if we had incur an expense like that. And then from a variable cost perspective, I'm thinking about the costs. You know, what are we paying for cigars? What are we paying for scotch? How much labor do we require? From a growth perspective, I want to look at the overall trends in, you know, the bar and restaurant industry in Chicago, specifically, you know, where we're located. I know location is extremely important for this type of business. I want to look at the demographics of Chicago and of our patrons.
Yep.
Are they favorable for our business going forward? I want to look at competition. Is there risk of a new cigar bar opening up down the street or across town? And then from a growth perspective, I also want to look at, are there any additional revenue streams or services that we could incorporate into our business that might generate some upside on the as-is case? I also want to look at some risks, some business risk moving in the future. So health and wellness is a really important trend for consumers today. So are people going to be resistant to smoking cigars, drinking scotch?
Yep.
And what is the customer sentiment about our industry? I want to look at, and just liability risk too. We are a bar, so you never know what's going to happen. But I think the most important thing to start out with would be to just value our profitability as is. So do we have any information about maybe revenues?
Yeah, so we do have some information. I'm just curious, I want to hear from you. We touched on it a little bit. What are some variables you think might drive some revenue peaks and valleys when we're thinking about how we're going to calculate our overall revenue?
Well, we talked about seasonality,
Yeah.
so I think that's going to be pretty important. Do we have any information about seasonality?
Yeah, and we can kind of, and you also mentioned weekends as well.
Yeah.
So in the spring and the summer, we're going to, like you said, as you expected, we're going to have the most revenue. So the spring and the summer on the weekends, we're going to make $4,800 a night.
So it's $4,800 per night of revenue. Okay.
And then for the rest of the week, in the spring and the summer, we're making 16 2/3% of our nightly revenue on a per night basis, essentially.
Okay. So 16 2/3% of the 4,800
Yeah.
per night. Okay. And that's a daily number, right?
Yep.
Okay. Per day. Okay. So that's spring and summer. Do we have any information about the fall?
Yeah.
and
So
winter?
so fall and winter, Friday and Saturday is 3/4 of our spring and summer weekend revenue. And then the rest of the week, it's 85% of our rest of week revenue. In the spring and summer.
Okay. Okay, cool. So these are, so just to summarize what we know here. So you've given me a map of, based on the benchmark of what our revenue is in the spring and summer on weekends, we should be able to put together a picture of what our revenue looks like on an annual basis. So first, I'm going to want to make some assumptions about number of weeks in a year and number of days in a week. So I'm assuming that we're open, weekends would include Friday and Saturdays.
Yep.
And that I'm also going to assume that there's 50 weeks in a year, approximately.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so spring and summer would be 25 weeks, and the fall and winter would also be 25 weeks. Okay. And I'm gonna assume that we said there's 2 days on weekends.
Yep.
And is it safe to assume that there's 5 days on the rest of the week?
What do you think? What do you think? What do you know about a bar or any business? Are they open 7 days a week? Most businesses.
My experience is that restaurants typically are open 7 days a week, but definitely depends on the.
Yeah. So we take a day. The Scotch Bar takes a day off. Doesn't work on Mondays.
Okay, that's fine. So this would be 4 days then.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that I have these assumptions, I'm going to go ahead and start calculating this out. So on the weekends, if we're earning $4,800 a night, we can multiply that by 2. That we get $9,600 per week.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. And we can multiply this times 25 to get the annual revenue on weekends. I'm just gonna grab a piece of paper here.
Sure.
So that is, I know this is actually $240,000.
Yeah.
96 divided by 4 is 24 times. Okay.
Wow. That's good math.
Thanks. Okay, and I know here that we're making 16 2/3 of the $4,800 per night per day.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I can take this 4,800 and multiply it by, I know 16 2/3% is 1/6. So this would be $800 per day.
Okay.
We said there's 4 days in a week.
Yep.
So that would be times 4 would be $3,200 per week.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're going to assume there's 25 weeks. So that gives us 32. It is $80,000 of revenue.
Sure.
Sorry, this is getting really scrunched here. So why don't I just write it a bit bigger? 240,000, 80,000. Okay, for the fall and winter, we know that we are pulling in 3/4 of our summer weekend revenue. And we said our summer weekend revenue is 240,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean that that our fall and winter weekend revenue would be 3/4 times 240,000, which is equal to 180,000.
Okay.
And we also know that for the rest of the week, we're pulling in 85% of our spring and summer revenue.
Yep.
So 80,000 times 85%. So I know 10% of 80,000 is 8,000.
Mm-hmm.
So 8,000 times 8 is 64,000.
Mm-hmm.
Plus an extra 5%, which would be 4,000, is equal to $68,000
Mm-hmm. Okay.
per year.
Cool.
So now I've mapped out the revenue for all of the different seasons and days of the week. So I just need to add these together to get my total annual revenue.
Yep.
So let's see, 240 plus 80 is 320. That's 500. So that's $568,000 per year of revenue for the Scotch Bar, which I think without looking at costs, it's hard to say whether this is a big number or not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that since we're probably a pretty upscale establishment if we're selling cigars and scotch,
Yeah.
I'm guessing our margins are high, but I think we should move into a cost analysis if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
You mentioned some of those costs that you were talking about.
Yeah.
So I think we can kind of jump into a number because you kind of covered the general cost that we'd be thinking about
Okay.
when we were thinking about that. So our variable costs are going to be 20% of revenue.
Okay.
And our fixed costs are going to be $120,000.
Okay, cool. So just pulling in our total revenue number from before, which was 568,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first let's do the variable cost. So variable cost is equal to 0.2 times 568,000. And so, is it okay to call this, say, 570?
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, so that would be 57,000 would be 10%, so times 2 would be 114,000 in variable cost per year,
Okay.
roughly.
Yep.
So now we should be able to calculate our annual profit number by taking the total revenue of 568,000 and subtracting our fixed cost and our variable cost of 120,000 and 114,000. So together that's 234,000 in costs. So this would be about 334,000 in annual profit, and that would be a before tax.
Okay.
So looks pretty good for our establishment, but what do we know anything about the tax rate for
For the bar?
the bar? Yeah.
It's 40%.
Okay, so to calculate our free cash flow, we want to take our profit after tax, profit before tax times 1 minus the tax rate. So that would be 334,000 times 1 minus 0.4, which is 60%. So 10% is 33.4 thousand. So this is about $200,000,
Okay.
roughly,
Mm-hmm.
in free cash flow
Okay.
per year. So we're getting pretty close to a valuation number.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that we're pulling in $200,000 per year. I think if we assume that nothing really is going to change in the near future about the business,
Yeah.
we can expect to pull this into perpetuity. Is that an okay assumption?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So in order to come up with a valuation for the bar, I'm going to use the perpetuity growth formula.
Okay.
So the value is equal to my steady state cash flow divided by the discount rate minus the growth rate.
Okay.
Now we've calculated this number to be $200,000 per year,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know the discount rate and we don't have an assumption yet for the growth rate.
So we can actually assume that the discount rate is 13%,
Okay.
and let's just say the bar's cash flow is growing at 3%.
Okay. So that would be 200,000 divided by 0.13 minus 0.10. Oh, sorry, minus 0.03.
Mm-hmm.
Which gives us 200,000 divided by 0.1, which is equal to $2 million as a valuation.
Okay.
So I think the bar is worth about $2 million, but that's really only taking into account the as-is cash flow. So this assumes that we're going to continue business as usual and grow at 3% into the future.
So you talked a little bit about some opportunities for growth. Can you think about some ways that you might consider improving cash flows if you were to be running the bar? What might be some ways that you might think about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Okay. So I'm going to separate this into revenue drivers
Okay.
and cost drivers.
Okay.
So are there any additional products or services that we could sell to help drive revenue in the future?
Right.
So there's 3 ways that we can do this. There's increased traffic, increased prices, or dollar per visit, or increased, and traffic would be split into like number of customers and how often they visit. So how can we affect these things? So one would be to increase the price per ticket. I think if we start offering food, that would be a really good way to bring new people into the store and also just get them to spend a little bit more. I don't know how diverse our Scotch and cigar offering is, but we could have things like cigar tastings or cigar and Scotch tastings.
Mm-hmm.
And bring in some new exotic products, try to have events and that kind of thing. There's probably an opportunity, especially if we have food, for bundling. So if we can come up with pairings of this cigar goes really well with this meal, or this cigar goes really well with this type of Scotch, we might be able to actually extract some value from our customers and upsell them to higher margin products. We may be able to expand the store or open a new store, so new locations. Events. I think it's a pretty good list for revenue.
Yeah, it seems pretty substantial to me.
Okay, so in terms of cost drivers, we could, evaluate our suppliers.
Yep.
There may be an opportunity to drive down our cost of goods sold.
Mm-hmm.
We could look at growth, cost savings through economies of scale. So if we can bring in some of this extra traffic, can we actually lower or increase our purchasing power, and then maybe also achieve some economies of scale?
Mm-hmm.
I think we can evaluate our menu. So there's a trade-off between having this huge diverse offering of cigars and Scotch, which may be what our patrons want, but it's expensive to carry that much inventory. So evaluate if we can pare down the menu.
Right.
Which may or may not be a good idea, but worth looking at.
Yeah, sure.
Anything else?
I mean, I think that those all seem like pretty good things. So, your buddy's about to pay his tab and headed back to his apartment in Chicago. He wants to know definitively what price you're going to pay for this bar.
Okay.
And what are some things that you would also want to look at potentially when you're thinking about making this acquisition? Obviously, as a joke, but he's just interested to hear how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, sure. Can I have a second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. So my recommendation is actually to try and go ahead and purchase this bar. Now, I'm assuming that my buddy and I don't have $2 million sitting around
Sure.
to just go and purchase this thing, but I think the bar is actually missing out on a huge revenue stream, which is selling food. And if we could purchase this bar and hire a chef, that we could extract way more than $2 million of value. So my recommendation is to try to find some sort of investors to help us make this deal. I think we can, back in the envelope, get another $1 million of value out of this. So I'm willing to pay up to $3 million for it.
So you'd be willing to pay with an MPV of 0?
Well, we're gonna have a positive MPV because we're gonna make this thing really.
With the food? The
Yeah.
food's gonna be worth over $3 million.
$1 million.
Well, right, but the food's gonna make the whole entire valuation worth over the $3 million valuation you'd be willing to pay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The risks I see are, number one is financing. I don't know if we're gonna be able to get this money. And two is just, I know the restaurant industry is famously, changing all the time. So are the trends in the industry are we gonna be as popular tomorrow as we are today? My next steps would be to go and secure the financing and also look into getting a chef.
Great. Awesome job.
Thank you. You really grilled me on the recommendation there.
I did grill you on the recommendation, and I can offer some thoughts on that in a second. If we can just go back to where you were at the beginning. So
That's my framework.
all right, so framework is right here. So just thoughts on the framework. I thought overall it was really meaty. It had everything that you want to think about when you're thinking about a valuation case, especially with something like a bar. You factored in a lot of these different factors that some people may put into like an actual bucket, but I think putting it into that growth element allows for you to really consider a lot of different things, and I think that's a strong way to think about it. Where one thing I might have thought about doing differently here would be in the opening part. There are a few more questions you could have asked. You can, at that point, you could have asked the discount rate, the hurdle rate. Along with that, you may want to think about maybe asking about seeing if you can draw out like a price point, even though it wound up not mattering, just something along those lines.
Yeah, I think I assumed we were a premium bar, but maybe that would have been a really good question.
Yeah.
To ask.
So something along those lines would have been something that it didn't come back to bite you, but it may have.
Okay.
Jumping into the revenue, so where I thought you were really I thought the strongest part of this entire aspect of this was when you summarized everything, and really broke it down so that I knew where you were going.
Yeah.
One thing that I do and a lot of people do is you give them numbers and they just go, all right, and they just start writing everything down and going immediately. By laying out your thinking for the interviewer, they know where you're going, and I think that they appreciate that rather than just being like, what is this guy doing?
Yeah, I'd say to critique myself also. I mean, it sounds silly, but I just wrote in way too little space.
Yeah.
And it just became really difficult to follow.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I think this one is quite easy to follow because I have enough space, but over here it's like, what's going on here?
Right. So yeah, so that would be one thing I would push you on. I would push you to think about if you use more paper. There's essentially an infinite amount of paper, so I would push you to put that total thing there. I personally like to do all my calculations on the other side on a scrap piece of paper, but the way you did it was pretty clean. The other thing I would push, I would say the way your logic and your percentages was really strong too. Like when you said, 10%, when we were doing 85% of 80,000, the fact that you were like, and rather than doing an algebraic equation, you said 10% of 80,000 is 8, you multiplied that by 8, and then you added the 4,000. I thought that was a really, really cool way to do it. I've never seen that before. Where I would push back is you did 9,600 times 25, got the 240K, and you got the answer right, but in my mind, I didn't totally understand the 25% logic and adding it back. I kind of understood where you were going, but I would just kind of draw out that explanation a little bit more. With regard to your brainstorm, which was underneath your framework, that's your recommendation. We'll get to it eventually. So with regard to your brainstorm, I thought it was strong. I have gotten feedback. Occasionally I'll do 3 bullet points before I actually think about what things I'm going to say, and I've gotten feedback before, like, don't do 3 bullet points and leave 1 blank, because it just means you, like, forgot or something like that.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, I definitely did. And it was supposed to be 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So yeah, good call.
So that's just something I've gotten feedback on in the past. The one thing I would say with a revenue driver, you may want to just talk about the opportunity to be open on Monday.
Oh yeah, definitely missed that one.
So just thinking about, like, you're open on Mondays, it's an extra X amount, you know, I mean, maybe they'll push you and ask you to do math. I wasn't going to, but just Monday opening might be something to think about. In terms of the recommendation, I thought overall it was strong. I pushed back on the $3 million just because I guess really one of the things that in this case that I've found makes for a strong recommendation is to come back with a number.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's no ROI goal, but maybe to create one and say, hey, like, I know when I'm investing, I want a 25% ROI. So I'm gonna make my opening bid at 1.5 million, and then you can say I'm willing to spend up to 3 million because of this, and this. I thought your risks and next steps were really good. What I will say is that I've gotten feedback from certain companies that when you're going through your recommendation, if you say, I think the risks are this and I think the next steps are this. So, like, for example, I know that McKinsey likes it when you say risks, next steps, but there are other companies that prefer for you to say something like, the things that I'm concerned about are X, Y, and Z, and the things I like to look at going forward are X, Y, and Z. So it just is a company-to-company type thing in terms of that. But overall, yeah, I thought you did a fabulous job.
I think it's worth mentioning again. I think the ROI misstep was a pretty big one. And if you're going to do these valuation cases, make sure you do that, which I messed up. Make sure you ask what the goal is in terms of what you'd be willing to pay. Yeah. Because I think I just kind of came up with this $3 million a little bit out of nowhere. Right. So self-critiquing, I think that was my biggest mistake. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the pushback I think was something you may or may not get. A lot of times they're not going to interrupt you during a recommendation, but I kind of felt like I should push back on that. And then I think, again, it's important to call out that when you're doing a valuation case, that perpetuity growth formula is your free cash flow, which is just going to be your profit, and then your profit after tax, for the most part in a consulting case, divided by your discount rate minus your growth. Most of the time, that subtraction on the denominator side is going to come out to be 5 or 10%. They're not trying to see how you divide some crazy number. They just want to know you know the formula, because it's just an expectation. But yeah, overall, great job. Thank you for watching, and feel free to reach out to either of us if you have any questions about the case or anything like that. Have a great day. Thanks.